Hey guys, it's Wasabi Fold back with an epic One Piece theory for you. If you are here because of the clickbait title, rest assured I plan to make good on the promise in that title. Because I honestly believe that the theory I'm presenting to you guys is the best Void Century theory you have or will ever hear. Now, what makes me so confident? Simply put, I believe I have found the myth that Oda has used to shape the outline of the Great War of the Void Century, and consequently, the myth that has shaped the very core of the One Piece series. This myth is the Chinese legend of the three sovereign and the five emperors. I believe looking into how this myth connects to One Piece will lead us on a path where we can theorize answers to some of the biggest mysteries that are currently in the series. So I guess the first thing that I need to do is I need to prove to you guys that this myth is connected to One Piece. And I'll start by giving a brief description of the characters that give the myth its name. The three sovereign, also known as the three august ones, are described as god kings or demigods who gave mankind the knowledge and tools necessary for mankind to prosper and form civilization. But our first connection actually comes from the description of the five emperors. The five emperors are described as incredible rulers who lived to a great age and ruled over a great period of peace in the world. They are usually depicted as elderly, wise sages. It is the Gorosei. I believe that Oda, inspired by this legend, created the concept of the Gorosei, which is five rulers ruling the world. And the Gorosei match perfectly with the description of the five emperors from the myth. They are old, they have ruled the world, and their great era of peace has been the 800 years since the end of the Great War and the Void Century. To take it a step further, in the myth, the three sovereign are the ones who are portrayed as being above the five emperors in the power scale. This brings us back to a certain chapter from the wrap-up of Dressrosa, chapter 793, The Tiger and the Dog, in which we see Akainu give us the first real implication that there is a higher authority than the Gorosei. He berates the Gorosei for allowing CP0 to go over their head and get permission to enact that farce, as he called it, where the false news report of Doflamingo leaving the Shichibukai was generated. This proof that there is a higher authority above the Gorosei, I think, lines up with my idea that this myth is connected directly to the power structure that Oda has put in place for his series. I believe that keeping this power structure from the myth in line with what he does in the One Piece world, Oda will create three entities that are at the very top of the One Piece world. These three beings will, just like the myth of the three sovereign, have godlike powers to a point where it would be hard to consider them human. They will be demigods. They will have been responsible for the Void Century, and they will be the final antagonists of the series. Now I know what you're saying. I'm giving theoretical characters based on a myth who have no current confirmation to even exist within the series the title of End of Series Antagonists. However, I will show you the second connection between this myth and One Piece, and after I do, I think you will believe that these characters will definitely make an appearance in some form. For this, we briefly look into one of the three sovereigns, the second one known as Nu Wa, and she is arguably the most important of the three. And I'm going to describe some of her legends that were chronicled in a particular Chinese mythological book. Going back to ancient times, when the four pillars were broken and the 9 provinces were in chaos, when heaven did not cover the earth and earth did not support heaven all the way around its circumference. That imagery is where we're going to stop for a moment. Right there, listen to it again. When heaven did not cover the earth and the earth did not support heaven all the way around its circumference. The entire One Piece series is set in a time after these events have come to pass. Heaven in One Piece is Mariejoa. It means the Holy Land, and through the world government, Mariejoa in a way covers the One Piece world. Their influence and empire has grown to a global scale. And where does Mariejoa reside? On top of a giant mass of earth known as the Red Line, a mass of earth that just so happens to stretch all the way around the One Piece world, around the circumference if you will. The imagery of heaven covering the earth and earth supporting heaven around its circumference has been brought to life by Oda right in front of us. He has taken this inspiration from this myth and basically created a world where the events that are described have happened. That is the Void Century. So we have tied now the 5 emperors to the Gorosei, and we've tied the 3 sovereign to the Void Century. And that is why I believe these characters are going to be involved when Oda finally begins to explain what happened during the Void Century. And I believe they would have been the antagonists back then, and they will be the antagonists at the end of the series. If at this point you don't believe that this myth has any connection to One Piece, I honestly don't know what I can say to convince you. But for those that are still with me, let's continue. Now that we have established the connection, we can look more at the individual characters themselves and see if we can figure out ways in which Oda will portray them and their demigod abilities that would be worthy of final antagonists. This is where we get theoretical. There isn't going to be as much actual evidence for the conclusions I'm going to get into, but bear with me. I'll start with a question. In fiction, what makes a god a true god? Fiction has various ways of depicting gods, and they usually have a huge range of power difference. But as a concept, 3 things make a god a true god: omnipotence, omniscience, and omnipresence. To be all-powerful, all-knowing, and everywhere at the same time. Exemplifying all of these 3 concepts makes you a god. The 3 sovereign are also reminiscent of the Holy Trinity from Christianity. This, in my opinion, is not coincidental. I believe Oda will make each one of the 3 sovereign represent a single aspect of true divinity. Not necessarily in a way that is universal, but tailor-made to a One Piece scale, where the power level would be something that is worthy of a world war, because that is what Oda promised us at the end. So I expect their powers to be planetary level, at least in terms of their influence. So who are the 3 sovereign? The 3 sovereign are Fuji, Nuwa, and Shenong. Fuji is the heavenly sovereign, Nuwa is the earthly sovereign, and Shenong is the human sovereign, and they rank in that order. Fuji being the most powerful. I believe that each member of the 3 sovereign will take on one single aspect of what it means to be a god. Fuji, being the most powerful, will be the omnipotent, Nuwa will be the omniscient, the all-knowing, and Shenong will be the omnipresent. And I'll explain what form I think Oda has given to each of them and how he plans to represent these concepts. But why do I think their powers will connect directly to godlike abilities? And it comes from what the myth is tied to. This myth at its core is a Chinese creation myth. It starts with the introduction of a character known as Pangu, a god who was said to be the first being at the start of the universe. In Pangu's myth, he's depicted as a giant who separated heaven and earth, after which he died and his essence flowed around the planet to give life to the rivers, the mountains, the vegetation, and so on and so forth. This is what I think happened during the Void Century. I believe that at the start of the Void Century, the Celestial Dragons decided to deal a crippling blow to the one kingdom in the world that was a rival to them, that being the earthly kingdom of the ancient the clan. Now, we don't know the name of this kingdom. I honestly believe that this kingdom were either improving in a way where they seemed to be a threat to the Celestial Dragons, and the Celestial Dragons decided to squash them out and rule over the rest of the world, probably because they thought themselves superior. I think what they did is that they created a power that Oda will base on the Chinese god of Pangu. They tried to make the ultimate weapon, the ultimate being whose power would be impossible to stand against, and that is what they did at the start of the Void Century War. This power was the first Devil Fruit, the original Devil Fruit. I believe the Celestial Dragons created one Devil Fruit at first, one all-powerful fruit that was intended to grant them the power of a god. However, just like with Pangu, when after he used his power he died, and his power spread around the world, I believe that after using the ability, the power left them because it was too much for one person to have, and that power spread around the world in different fragments and formed what we would call the Age of Devil Fruit. That's why the Void Century War took 100 years, because after the initial attack, they lost control of their weapon. and they lost a lot of that power, and they basically armed the enemy with devil fruit powers, and that was what started the age of devil fruits. It was a giant war fought over these particular powers, and I believe the celestial dragon ruler will be based on the legend of Fuji. Fuji is considered in his legend to be the original human, the first being that would be considered close to being human. He is descended in part directly from Pangu, and I think this is where the celestial dragons get their belief that they are descendants from God, because not only is Fuji claiming to have been descended from God, but he also has created powers that would give the impression that he is a god. A power that originally had every power within it, had the capability to do anything. Breaking apart would create an infinite number of possible fragments and pieces that could have been used as devil fruit powers. I find it hard to believe that a devil fruit that could create biscuits or a devil fruit that can create cheese is an actual natural occurring event. And it makes more sense to me that devil fruits were actually born from one power that could do anything imaginable, and that's why that power has changed into so many different forms. And I'm going to go one step further with Fuji. What is his significance? If there's this all-powerful godlike being currently in Mariejoa, even if he's in a weakened state and he has lost his power, why hasn't he done anything? And I think, again, it goes back to the legend of Pangu. Pangu, in his original form, was said to be a giant asleep in an egg of chaos. That is the imagery that they give. But basically, he is an entity that was asleep until the time was right for him to awaken from the universe. And that's what I think Oda is doing. I think that what the celestial dragons are building towards is the reawakening of their god, their all-powerful being, in preparation for that final war when someone finally finds One Piece. I don't think Pangu or Fuji, I should say, and his power is currently active. I think he's dormant. And I'm actually going to go one step further. I believe he is the national treasure of Mariejoa. Now again, I'm sure there's some of you that are going to question why you make that jump, but I have proof that the national treasure of Mariejoa is a person directly from the manga. Recall, in my opinion, the most important chapter of Dressrosa, chapter 761, the Opi Opi no Mi. Doflamingo gives us some huge hints as to what the national treasure is. In the beginning of that chapter, the report is that Fujitoro and Sabo fought to a draw, and Oda highlights some interesting words from Fujitoro. Fujitoro says, "Do you think the world government is some kind of god?" He makes Maynard, Vice Admiral Maynard, note that there is something about those words, and I think that's really Oda's way of making the audience pay attention to that statement. Later in the same chapter, Doflamingo describes why he is able to wield such political power. It's because of his knowledge of the national treasure of Mariejoa, and he talks about how if he had lost power in particular on that day, he would have been able to take control of the national treasure of Mariejoa and control the world. He also mentions Law's personality switching ability in the same breath. So we know two things. Doflamingo needed Law's ability to take control of the national treasure. He notes that the two abilities he needed were the personality switch and the immortality surgery. I believe we can piece these clues together to come to a conclusion about what the national treasure is. It is a person. It is a person who has a godlike power that can control the world within them, lying dormant. Doflamingo needed the Opi Opi no Mi to transfer his consciousness into the body of that person and take it over. And then he wanted the Opi Opi no Mi user to kill themselves, basically, to give him immortality. What Doflamingo wanted is he wanted to be immortal with the power of a god granted to him. That's what he wanted. He didn't aim to be Pirate King. That was never his goal. And even though his crew believed that, that is because they simply did not know. They were pawns to him. He never let them in on the secret. Doflamingo wanted the power of God all to himself. This fits perfectly with my idea that the Celestial Dragons created a godlike power at the start of the Boys' Century, and that is what led to the birth of Devil Fruits, that is what led to the start of the Great War, but it also led to their decisions that have shaped the entire One Piece world. This is what I think Oda is building towards. It makes more sense than Blackbeard being the final villain or Akainu being the final villain. these guys have already been revealed. I think it makes more sense for a character that redefines your very perception on what a devil fruit is and where they came from to be the final villain, the original devil fruit user. And even though Fuji is a god, I believe that we need to move on to the most important character of the three sovereign, Nuwa. In the myth, she is Fuji's brother, and her role is very important. In fact, it is Nuwa who wins the war and finishes the repair of heaven. Thus, I believe, while Fuji's character will be out of commission, it is Nuwa who will be currently running the One Piece world. Thus, I believe her power and role will be to be the omniscient one of the trio. She knows the full truth to what happened during the Void Century, and this is a key aspect of figuring out what her power would be. I believe that after losing control of Fuji's power and getting involved in a war that would stretch on 100 years, the Celestial Dragons needed to come up with a way to stop the bleeding. They made a mistake, they declared war, but they lost their strongest weapon. But I think what's most important to note is that if they had lost an original godlike power, they would still try to take over the world. You know, they started something, they try to finish it. I think what they did is they made two other powers that are not quite as powerful, but still strong enough to give them what they need to beat devil fruit users. The first one goes to Nuwa. I believe her power will be the Kitsune, the demon fox. Now, I have a reason for this. It has nothing to do with Naruto, honestly. There's connections between One Piece and the true legend of a demon fox spirit and its abilities that will shock you. First of all, a demon fox in lore is said to gain a new tail every 100 years, and every time it gains a new tail, it becomes more powerful. However, there is significance placed on the ninth tail. They are said to turn golden or white, and they gain omniscience. A fox spirit that has gained its ninth tail and has lived for 900 years gains the ability to see and hear everything across the entire world. If we're going to have a war at the end of the series that will engulf the entire world, it makes sense to have a character that can perceive events as they occur no matter where they are on the planet. But the connections go well beyond that. 900 years is an important number in the One Piece timeline because it has been 800 years since the establishment of the world government. Oda has said this. However, the 800 years followed the 100 years that is the Void Century. That is approximately 900 years. I don't think it's a coincidence that a demon fox has so much emphasis placed on its 900th birthday, and Oda has created a series with a 900-year timeline like that. It's not a coincidence. We are currently within the time that if someone who had been created or given a demon fox power, they would be approaching their omniscient power up. I don't think that's an accident. I think what Oda has done up until this point is intentionally had these characters been pretty much in dormancy or in waiting for this moment, this coming up moment, this end of the 900 years will be the final power up where the world government will seek to finish what they started at the beginning of the Void Century and eradicate the D-Clan and basically subjugate the entire world. That is the significance of the 900 years. But this is a lot to digest, so let's just recap for a moment and take a breath. My theory up to this point is this. The ancient celestial dragons wanted to rule the earth. To do so, they created one original devil fruit. We are going to call this fruit the God fruit. They created this fruit with the intention to grant one individual the power of a god, who was their leader at the time, represented by the Chinese, the first sovereign, Fuji. This godlike power, however, was modeled, or at least Oda will make it represent the Chinese god of Pangu, which means that after using the power, it burst forth from him and traveled across the surface of the planet into different fragments, which created the Age of Devil Fruits. This loss of their ultimate weapon and this arming of the enemies with newfound powers led to a 100-year struggle between the two kingdoms, the ancient kingdom of the D-Clan and the Celestial Dragons. But the Celestial Dragons still managed to win due to the leadership of Nuwa, the second sovereign, who had, in my opinion, the Demon Fox fruit and use her powers to defeat the enemy. Now, demon foxes have a lot of cool abilities. They can rob you of your memories. That may be why no one can remember the void century. And they can also, use magic and other things. It's a powerful being, not in the way that Kishimoto used it at all. So now that we're here, we need to answer one fundamental question: who created the first devil fruit? And I think this title, this honor, goes to the third sovereign, Shenong, and that is why his significance is so important to the story. Now you might be answering why I say he is the one that created it, because out of the three sovereigns, Shenong is the one who is said to have a gift for agriculture. He is the one who is said to have really given mankind the tools necessary for agriculture. He's credited with the creation of several gardening tools, but he's also credited with the experimentation into plants himself. And his entire theme surrounds agriculture, nature, and so on and so forth. And like I said in the beginning, I think all three of the sovereign will represent a different aspect of divinity. So I believe this guy will be the omnipresent one. And you also have to look at how he died. He died by doing so many experiments on his own body with plants that he eventually ate the wrong one, and it ate through his stomach lining and he died. So this is the character I believe Oda will use as the source of devil fruits. He is the one who was the mastermind behind it all, and likely he is the one who created the greatest counter to the devil fruits, and that is the ocean itself, the sea. Yes, I do not believe that the weakness to the sea that all devil fruits share is a natural occurrence. And the first clue to this comes again from the story of Nuwa, the second sovereign. It is said that she did several things. She repaired heaven, she defeated her enemy, and she refilled the ocean. That is such an interesting detail about Nuwa's legend. She refilled the oceans. Why would she have to refill the oceans? I think what Oda will do is that he will make it so that the biggest conspiracy ever is that devil fruits are actually weak to the sea when they were not. They're only weak to the sea because of what the ancient celestial dragons who created them did to the ocean itself. Basically, to beat the devil fruit army, they created or invented a weakness for devil fruit users. They changed the very aspect of the sea to make it have anti-devil fruit properties. Now immediately you might say, okay, well they created the Mizumizu no Mi or something like that. No, I don't think that they created a Logia type who then became the ocean. However, I think that the third power of Shenong, the one that will represent omnipresence, is something that has merged him with the ocean, something that has made him an entity that literally has his presence in the sea. And every time a devil fruit user falls into the sea, the true purpose of drowning them and taking their power is to take back that power and bring it back to the celestial dragons so they can begin to revive Fuji and his original godlike power. And they've been doing this for 800 years. It is why no one remembers the void century. It is the greatest lie that has ever been told about devil fruits. So what power does he actually have? I believe the power Oda will grant this individual is the power of the Umebozu, another Japanese demon or god similar to the Kitsune. However, the Umebozu is a sea god known for capsizing sailors if they encounter it. Obviously that makes sense. In other words, they created a being that would drown devil fruit users and steal their power and bring it back to wherever they're gathering them. His trick was to force sailors to give him a barrel, which he would fill with seawater until they drowned. The trick to escaping was to give him a bottomless barrel. This obviously harkens back to the significance of the Thriller Bark moment where we saw the Straw Hats get tricked by a barrel floating in the water. That is why Oda gave the shadow of the Umebozu at the end of that arc. And if you look at the visual depictions of an Umebozu, you'll see that they really are reminiscent of those shadows. They are a blank, shadowy form coming out of the sea. They're so dark that there is really no distinctive features about them except for their two eyes. And they also seem to have rounded heads, which is part of their name or mystique because they're said to have looked like monks with their bald heads. And we see 4 of them, or at least 3 of them, in those shadows back in Thriller Bark. I believe that Shenong, the third sovereign, controls the sea itself because he has become merged with the sea or fused with the sea and has imbued it with the power to counter devil fruit users. And over the 800 years, he has completely permeated the entire water system of the One Piece world to where no matter what, devil fruit users are weak to water when exposed to it in the right way. So in my opinion, this will be the final antagonist. How amazing would it be for Oda to escalate the series to a point where all of the characters that we've met up until this point have to fight against literally the very things that make them a devil fruit user, the sea. That would be an amazing enemy to fight. It would be awesome to see it happen. And I honestly believe that we are actually going to see this character. This is what makes me confident that these three characters will play a role. They've each got a huge connection to the actual series of One Piece itself. So we have built a framework for the Void Century and given life to possible characters that would have been responsible for the events and the events that are yet to come. The three sovereign, one with the power of a god, one with the demon fox power who is on the verge of awakening an omniscience power and has been working on the god's revival, Fuji's revival, since the end of the Void Century, and one that is trapped as a sea spirit bound to the ocean whose sole purpose is to kill devil fruit users throughout the centuries and keep the power out of people's hands. Three antagonists who could embody the power that Oda talked about of the final war, a war that is supposed to engulf the world. That is my theory. So this is a Void Century theory that I made, and I honestly think it is an amazing Void Century theory. So what do you guys think? To those that have come this far, I know it's been a really long video, but if you've heard my points, I hope I've represented them well enough for you so that you can understand what I'm talking about. However, if there are things that you're missing, I will explain them in the comment section down below. So feel free to comment, leave a like, subscribe, share the video. That's most important. And let's discuss if this is a really great Void Century theory. I honestly believe that it is. Alright, thank you guys for watching. This is Wasabi Fold, signing out.